Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CTCPA webinar this morning. We're really fortunate. You've got some great speakers coming to you this morning, and I believe that you'll leave this program with a lot of questions answered, as well as a lot of things you hadn't thought about before raised that will help you deal with the situation that is now our normal. So again, thank you for joining the CTCPA this morning. I'm going to turn the program over to Alicia Strong.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks everyone for being here. I just want to take a couple minutes and go over a few housekeeping things. But first, if you don't know me, I am Alicia Strong and I am a member of the membership team here at CTCPA. So with the Zoom platform, if you have technical questions for the CTCPA staff, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and send your questions directly to the panelists/hosts, not the attendees. Separate from the chat box, you're going to see a Q&A feature. Please use that box to ask your content-related questions for speakers in a written form. Questions are then going to be answered time permitted. Our first speaker, Joya, will do his best to answer questions as they're received. Paul Pescatello will answer questions at the end of his presentation, time permitted. And Representative Ritter is on a very tight time schedule. He will only be addressing the questions that were pre-submitted prior to today. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker. Pete Joya is the Economic Advisor to the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, CBIA, the state's largest business organization, and chief economist at pgecon.com. He tracks Connecticut's economy through the quarterly economic survey, conducts the annual CBIA membership survey on public policy issues, and publishes numerous white papers and special reports on topics such as transportation, myths and facts about the Connecticut economy, and state spending. Pete is a frequent speaker at conferences and seminars. He's quoted over 400 times a year in the media and is a frequent guest on media programs concerning business and political issues in the region. He holds a master's degree with distinction in public affairs from the University of Connecticut and a bachelor's degree in history and economics from Hobart College. Pete, thanks so much for being here to speak with us today.
Great to have you have me, and welcome to all the participants. I know there's a good number of you on. Of course, some of the things that she mentioned, such as doing dozens of speeches a year, that's not necessarily happening now, but hopefully we're going to see some changes coming up. One of the things that I did do recently at the beginning of the year, and hopefully all of you have had a chance to take a look at it, is the CTCPA survey of challenges facing the accounting profession and clients and possible solutions, which I did with the CTCPA staff. And a lot, even though that was done before we got hit with this full COVID, a lot of it is still quite applicable. In particular, one of the challenges that we noticed amongst both the CPAs and the client companies was recruiting and retaining employees. That may actually be affected somewhat positively at the tail end of this COVID crisis, because our graduates as likely to go to New York City and Boston as they might have been before this crisis hit us. So there may be some more leeway with some firms in terms of their hiring. Complying with and understanding new state and regulations was a big issue. That's still going to be big. And how's this, post-COVID going to work out in terms of paying for all this federal and state largesse that has been distributed? And how is it going to work in terms of who gets forgiven and who doesn't get forgiven from the PPP and other programs? That would be a challenge. Succession is going to be a challenge. And one of the things that I think is going to be an issue is, if anything, this COVID may actually have accelerated the number of people who are thinking of retiring. And as the survey shows, we still have a significant number of companies that don't have succession plans. And even though a lot of companies are advising other companies on succession plans, that doesn't mean they have one themselves. So this is a challenging area, and I don't think it's going to go away. What we've seen recently, emblazoned across our TV screens across the nation, has been a groundswell of protests over a really heinous act by police in Minneapolis. That may have some impact on one of the other questions that came out from the survey, and that's that diversity is an area where there's concerns, and the responses to that are necessarily mixed, though some folks said it could be a key to future recruitment. I think firms, especially in light of what we've seen recently, have got to pay more attention to diversity than they ever thought of. They really have to have a company that's reflective of their clients, of reflective of their community, and that taps all the skills that are within the community. Using new technology and automation are key concerns of clients. I think that one of the things that we're going to see as a benefit come from this COVID crisis is tens of thousands of people work from home. And a lot of firms that didn't think that they could be effective or that their employees could be productive working from home are seeing something really different now. And there's a massive use of that. I think that's going to have an effect on the use of technologies with firms. I also think, as I go on, it's going to have an effect on certain things like commercial real estate going forward. And, one of the things that really came out, which was certainly depressing, is that most of the respondents of this survey thought in the prior legislative session that more of the policymakers, the supermajority of the policymakers, didn't understand their business and were not putting the state in the right direction rather than the wrong direction. And that's going to be a concern going forward with the next legislative session, and there may be special sessions coming up. But I think the other thing it's going to have to do is there's going to have to be concern as to how everything plays out, not only with the money, but also with policies post this COVID crisis. Are there going to be massive expansions of paid family and sick leave? Are there going to be changes to other leave policies? Are there going to be other factors that are going to come into play with businesses that could have a significant impact on cost structures now and going into the future? One of the things that has really concerned me in the last month or so in this crisis is not only how people are reacting to the real dire facts of what we've seen in things like increases in unemployment and unemployment rate, but how some of that has been hyped by the news media or certain commentators on this. I think there are some economists who have not done the public and the business community a service with the way they have been hyping this stuff. Obviously, we have been through a tremendous problem in terms of the economy. I mean, approximately in May, approximately 300,000 workers just in Connecticut are receiving benefits. Something like 20% of the workforce throughout the whole U.S. We're also seeing that claimants are more likely to be female, they're more likely to be younger, they're more likely to be minority, and they're more likely to have worked in accommodation and food services, retail, than in, say, in manufacturing or some other areas. That's not surprising, given how the shutdown came about. I mean, the shutdown clobbered a lot of personal services, direct to the public. It certainly hit all sorts of food and all sorts of accommodation, everything concerning tourism, a lot of entertainment. And this has reflected itself in what we've seen in unemployment rates. But, you know, a lot of this is likely to be short term. There's going to be some long term issues, and I will go through that. But a lot of it's likely to be short term. You know, in April, jobs declined 266,000. You know, I think when you add together the numbers from the April, May, and the upcoming June report, we'll probably see an aggregate well over 400,000 people have been affected by unemployment in Connecticut. But by the time that June report comes out, a number of them will be back to work. And the restaurants have opened for takeout. They have opened for outside dining. They're likely by the end of June to have inside dining of some sort come back. We've seen the casinos reopen. And the biggest thing we've got to talk about is that a lot of things did not close. Now, you know, Connecticut is and was different in how it got affected by this crisis. First, we probably, particularly being between Boston and New York, got hit a bit harder than much of the country. So, you know, our effect from the COVID was more damaging than some other areas. But two other things that I think come into play. One is our unemployment is probably on average a little bit higher than nationwide because some places didn't shut down. The other thing though, and probably the most important, is the mix of our industry is different, and in terms of dealing with this crisis, better for the economy than a lot of states. We're very strong on defense, which never shut down. We're very strong on manufacturing. Much other manufacturing didn't shut down, or they were producing PPE and converted their lines and stayed open. Most distribution didn't shut down. Insurance and financial services didn't shut down. A lot of these people work from home and still are, and may continue to work from home. But I think if you take a look at, you know, those industries, their people have been working from home. They've been getting paychecks. If you take a look at healthcare, certainly, you know, there was a need for this with this crisis, and so that hasn't shut down. You know, we have less strength and dominance in areas that have been really seriously affected. I mean, some of the states, particularly in the center of the country, the effect on energy production has been devastating for them, coupled with the fact that our energy prices have dived. That has been really a difficult time for them. A lot of the food raising, food farming, whether it be cattle and sheep or corn and soybeans, these areas have gotten hit hard. Florida vegetable farming, there are challenges with that. If you take a look at tourism, Connecticut does have some tourism. A lot of it's concerning the casinos, concerning the Southeast coast, but it's only about 4% of our economy. And one of the biggest parts, the casinos, are already starting to reopen. So, you know, our effect on tourism probably won't be as severe as other areas, and probably doesn't mean as much. I mean, you take a look at a state like Florida, state like, you know, Southern California, you know, a lot of the areas that may be ski country, a lot of the areas on the Gulf Coast. These people are really, you know, really suffered with the loss of tourism. And, you know, you take a look at you know, major airline hubs and major cruise ship ports. We don't necessarily have that. Yeah, Bradley does do international, but not to the extent of a Logan or a JFK. So let's talk about other areas that have been affected. If you take a look at, what the feds have done, we're hearing, and we'll get more data later on, how the PPP program has affected companies, how the extended unemployment benefits are affecting people. I think neither one of those programs have run perfectly. There are challenges of both. Some people and some businesses are still waiting for money. But the fact of the matter is they did react fast, and they did pour a lot of money into relief that's helpful. And so, I think that there certainly are issues that have been challenges for businesses, but the Fed and the Federal Reserve have stepped up in a very difficult time and have mentioned that they're willing to do more. Now, there were some comments by the chief of the Federal Reserve that I think were misinterpreted and overblown. He was talking about the future of the economy. He's talking about being extremely worried about people losing their jobs if states don't reopen. Well, subsequent to his comments, a lot of the states have reopened. And certainly it's a problem if people are out of work for an extended period of time. But he also talked about what he saw going forward in the economy. And he was reasonably bullish past the third quarter of what there could be for potential for the US economy. That has been reflected by the stock market. Now, certainly, people will say, well, the stock market's not the economy. That's correct. But the stock market does a fairly good job of projecting where the general economic trends are going to be 6 months from now. And certainly when all these shutdowns came about, the economy got clobbered and the stock market got clobbered, and it took a deep dive. But if you take a look since then, we're 25.5 and up. And that's a lot better than the 19,000 and change that we were in late March. And it goes to show that even in the short term, there's a lot of resilience in the stock market. And I think part of the reason why it's at where it's at is like the confidence of the Fed chief. The market is confident that things will come back, certainly in the fall. Now, Paul is going to talk about all the pharmacological and vaccines and all that, but there's a lot of stories out there that we could be in a lot better shape in terms of sustaining reopening because of those challenges. And I want to, in the remaining minutes I've got, talk about some longer term challenges and changes and what's going to happen. I had a question that came in on, what about the markets rebounding? Well, I'm telling you that they're going to. They've already rebounded substantially. I think by the end of the year, we'll recover almost all of what we lost, maybe more. What happens if there's, or what could trigger a second shutdown? Well, certainly these recent protests, as legitimate as they might be for protest, are certainly created more exposure than we were planning on. And you can only hope that they're not going to lead to, in certain areas, a second wave, because there is a concentration of people and a lot of them weren't wearing masks. So that's a risk. But if there are second waves, I think they will be addressed on a case-by-case basis, region by region. I don't think you're going to see a massive return to shutdown, though you could see a city have a shutdown, you could see a community have a shutdown, you could see, industries, maybe they reopen churches and they say, no, it's too dangerous, we're going to shut churches. Maybe they reopen bars and then they say, no, there's too much activity going on here, we're going to shut bars. Those things could happen, but I don't think they'll have widespread effect, and I don't think they'll reverse the trend towards opening. What are going to be things that are going to change? One is gas consumption. There's going to be a lot more people working at home. There've been a lot more people working at home. And that's going to have an effect on state tax revenues. And I think that is going to lead to challenges, particularly in Connecticut here, which already has a weak transportation fund in terms of how we sustain that. Commercial real estate. If you got a 10-year lease and you got 8 years left on it, your employees are coming back to work. If you got 1 year left on it, the chances of you telling your real estate vendor, hey, I don't want all this space on my renewal, and having half of it, a third of it, 10% of it, those are all things that could happen. And I think over the next 10 years, that's going to have an effect on commercial real estate. I think over the next 10 years, it's going to have an effect on gas consumption. Tourism is certainly going to be affected. I think some of the local things like the casinos are not going to be as much affected, but if you're talking about European and Asian vacations and flights to Australia, 20 hours on a plane, I think this stuff is going to be slow in coming back. I don't think it's going to be that quick. I think it's probably going to require a vaccine. Certainly, I think if you go to Europe, if you don't want to quarantine, they're going to want to see some proof you tested negative. So there's going to be challenges that happen with those industries. And until you get widespread travel again, you're going to have problems with the airlines. And another thing that may well change with the airlines is we're seeing right here on a Zoom meeting, and there's WebEx meetings and other sorts of meetings. And instead of talking to your vendor in France or China or Malaysia or Great Britain, I think you're going to see more of these for sales calls and sales follow-ups and dealing with your customer and taking care of your customer. And that will have an effect on the travel industry. It's not going to be the week-long hotel in London. It's not going to be the flight to London. It's not going to be the expense account to London. It's going to be 2 or 3 days of conferencing via technology. And that is going to have an effect on those industries. I think another big change is going to be the global supply chain. Now, I think the effect of having PPE and drugs sourced from China, of drugs sourced from India, all that sort of stuff, the enormous problems we've had in the supply chain here with this is going to change things. People and businesses are going to demand better access to the raw materials they need to keep themselves in production. That's going to change. That's going to increase prices, and that's going to change who are the vendors. It's not going to happen overnight, but again, this is one of those things over the next 10 years that is going to significantly change. Part of that change is going to be an overhaul in the US of the food supply chain. I think the sights of people plowing under vegetables in Florida and killing cattle and pigs and chickens in the Midwest are going to lead to substantial changes in that industry. I think you're going to see more slaughterhouses, more dispersion. I think you're going to see multiple lines for, some of these vegetable farmers in Florida. So, that's going to be a problem. One of the things that's also going to, I think, have an effect, I got a question, do you see Connecticut real estate market surge with people moving from the New York City suburbs to Connecticut? I think the Boston suburbs too. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a surge. It's going to be a change. There is also going to be a change in terms of cities first versus suburbs. In this COVID crisis, Connecticut suburbs started to look darn attractive. The dispersion, which was a huge detriment, has now been turned into a benefit. I think you will see changes. I don't know if it's going to necessarily be a surge, but it is going to be a steady stream of change. I think a lot of young couples that are in New York and Boston, as they have kids and they see what happened with this COVID, are thinking even more than they would have. Oh boy, we should get to Connecticut. Glastonbury looks a lot safer than Manhattan. So I think that will be a change. I think that there's going to be a change in nursing homes. They didn't lock down quick enough. I think there's going to be a massive number of lawsuits against them. Some of these places lost 30, 35 people. They're not going to get away from this unscathed. And they're going to need to change. And they're going to need to change substantially. I think, just going in on a normal visit, if you're a relative to grandma, is going to mean questions. It's going to mean a temperature check. Pardon me. You're going to need a mask, and it's going to be one or two people, not 7 or 8 people going to see grandma at once. These things, I think, are going to be in place for a long, long time based upon this. The other thing that has to come about is we've been living in an environment that is so low inflation for so long that I think we haven't quite gathered the fact that inflation is a risk. I think you're going to see inflation subdued with energy prices, but you're going to see inflation come back with supply chain changes. I think there's going to be an impact in terms of the food supply chain too. So, if I'm pegging inflation risk over the next 6 months, I'm placing it flat or downward. 2021 to 2025, I think there's an upward tick. I don't think it's going to be severe. I think the Fed's going to step in to keep things reasonable. But, you're producing pharmaceuticals and PPE and other supply chain things in Des Moines, Iowa, or Manchester, Connecticut, and instead of Wuhan, China, it's cost you more money. And that's going to be passed down the line, and that's going to have an effect on companies' bottom line and what consumers have to spend. Wrapping up, the consumer is going to be slow to come back. Why? First, online, they've been vigorous. Why? Because if you take a look even at what we're seeing in the restaurant and hair salon reopenings in Connecticut, a third of the people can't wait, and they're out there. A third of the people are saying, oh, let's wait and see. I want to see if everything's okay before I go out. And a third of the people will let their hair grow down to their knees, and they will hunker down until they've got 2 vaccines. And that is in part, parts of their own choice, but in part it's that the government officials and the news media have done one hell of a job of scaring the hell out of people. You know, I've talked with people who have taken a trip to Walmart or the supermarket, but they're terrified of going out to an outdoor restaurant. Having done both, it's a heck of a lot safer in an outdoor restaurant than traipsing through Walmart. And people don't know this until they do it. So that is probably going to be one of the bigger drags on reopening, because we already know that there are some businesses that are struggling with the reopening. They're hanging on by their fingernails, and if they don't see a pretty solid opening by sometime in July, they may not make it. You know, so I think overall the economy is a lot better than what you're hearing on the hype. I think there are still significant challenges. I think there are significant changes that we're going to deal with, particularly over a 10-year span rather than a year span. I think, though, that, you know, by and large, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we'll get down to below 6% unemployment by the time the elections roll around. I'm hopeful we're going to have close to 28,000 down by the time the election rolls around. I'm hopeful that, you know, we're going to see the majority of industries reopen, and the majority of them reopen strong. We'll wait to see, but I think that, you know, people should look at the statistics soberly and differentiate between what are the statistics and what is the hype. Because there are people out there who, you know, are hyping this stuff, and I think are scaring people unnecessarily. So don't be scared, be smart, and good luck to you, good luck to your business. And I'm signing off now. Thank you for your time. If you got any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them.
Thank you so much, Pete. I think you answered the question that was posed during the presentation. So thank you. If anyone is looking to view the CTCPA benchmark survey that Pete talked about, that was emailed to you in your email yesterday from Lisa Bugren. With that had your Zoom call information, you'll also see the benchmark survey that you can download in there. So our next speaker is Paul Pescatello. He is Senior Counsel and Executive Director of the Connecticut Business and Industry Association's Connecticut Bioscience Growth Council. A highly effective voice for the sciences, Paul's advocacy focuses on policies that foster the translation of basic research into clinical therapies, recognize the uniquely large investment necessary for effective biopharma research and development, and safeguard intellectual property. Paul is the co-chair of We Work for Health Connecticut and an attorney with over 30 years of experience as an advocate and counsel for biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and banking venture capital related interests. In addition to his public affairs and public policy activities, Paul sits on numerous boards, including Connecticut Innovations, the Connecticut Regenerative Medicine Research Fund Advisory Committee, and the Task Force to Study Rare Diseases for the Connecticut General Assembly. Paul, thanks for your time. It's all yours.
Well, good morning. It's great to be with all of you, and in these crazy coronavirus times. Today we're going to be talking in this segment about COVID-19 biopharma R&D. I have some really interesting findings to report and some cause for optimism about conquering COVID-19. I'm going to switch now and share with you some PowerPoint. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so here's, I have a bunch of slides. I'm going to go through them very quickly, so don't be intimidated. There's 60 of them. I want to start by, what are we talking about? we're talking about two things: the novel coronavirus and COVID-19. What's the difference? The novel coronavirus is the pathogen that causes the disease COVID-19. Novel just means new. The novel coronavirus is the newest iteration of a set of coronaviruses. Coronaviruses are very common. They're the cause of the common cold. They're common in animals as well as humans. And that's the good news. Because they're common, we know a lot about them, and this will help immensely in finding treatments and cures. I just want to say too that technically the novel coronavirus is SARS-CoV-2. And that there was a lot of politics surrounding the name because some thought that the SARS-CoV-2 connotated the original SARS, which was designated a Chinese virus. And as you know, it's likely that this virus, the coronavirus that we're dealing with now, originated in China, in Wuhan, in a wet market. And wet markets are slaughterhouses where both domesticated as well as wild animals are slaughtered. Now again, COVID-19 and all the symptoms and horrible things we've been heard about is the disease caused by the novel coronavirus. COVID-19 is mostly a respiratory disease, and it is very much dependent on viral load. Now, what exactly is viral load? It's the amount of viral particles you ingest. In the case of the coronavirus, it's the amount of viral particles you inhale. And just by way of context, a cough has about 3,000 droplets coming at you at about 50 miles per hour. A sneeze has about 30,000 droplets coming at you at about 200 miles per hour. A breath has anywhere from 50 to 5,000 droplets coming at you at fairly low velocity. And again, you need as few as 1,000 viral particles to become infected. So the worst case scenario is someone sneezing right into your face as you're inhaling. There are a lot of unknowns though around this. How long does a particle stay suspended in the air? How long do particles persist on different surfaces? And how many particles are picked up by touching them and then touching your face? So with that background on the coronavirus and on COVID-19, what I'm mainly going to be talking about today are vaccines to prevent COVID-19 and drugs and other mechanisms to prevent COVID-19. So again, vaccines to prevent and other things to treat the ongoing COVID-19 infection. Then just briefly, I want to talk about some public health issues surrounding the R&D for COVID-19. And as we get started, I just want to say there's been really an unprecedented private and public effort to combat COVID-19. So there's some really good news here. Something on the order of 100 COVID-19 vaccines are in development, and more than 150 treatments are being studied. There's been remarkable collaboration between industry partners and between industry and the government sector. Already, the major biopharma players in the vaccine space have agreed to pool vaccine manufacturing capacity. Now, first, let's talk about how vaccines work. They're a cure of sorts, but they don't cure COVID-19 once you come down with the disease. Again, vaccines prevent you from getting the disease in the first place. And then just by the sort of vaccines 101, remember they train the body to recognize and respond to proteins produced by the disease you're trying to combat. Traditional vaccines consist of small or inactivated particles of the pathogen that we're trying to combat. and then to train your body again to recognize it and have your body's own immune system to fight off the infection. Let's see. So there are 5 different types of vaccines that I want to talk about that are under investigation. The first 2 are what I call, and people in the vaccine space call, traditional vaccines. The first are live vaccines. They use a weakened, in the case of the coronavirus, they would use a weakened version of the coronavirus. The second type uses a killed coronavirus vaccine, again, a killed coronavirus pathogen that will be recognized as foreign matter and to allow your immune system to mount a fight against the infection. The third type is doesn't use the coronavirus or the virus that you're trying to combat. It uses a different virus, an innocuous virus. It can be human or animal virus. And the virus is engineered to include some component of the pathogen, in this case of SARS-CoV-2, some components of it. Some of the spikes you see, that's where the name comes from, the corona, so, to have some of the spikes so that, again, your body will recognize it and mount an immune response. Already, AstraZeneca, just in the last, I think it was just 2 days ago, announced a $750 million program to manufacture the Oxford University vaccine that shows significant promise. So that's a great step. The fourth type of vaccine are called messenger RNA or mRNA vaccines. And these vaccines use RNA to actually make your own cells mount a defense or create some of the proteins that will be recognized by your body to mount a defense. You probably heard a lot about the Moderna biotech vaccine. It caused a lot of interest a few days ago or a few weeks ago, caused the stock market to have a huge spike with some very positive results that came from their mRNA vaccine. So as important as that Moderna is, and actually Moderna also has announced just yesterday, I think, that it will begin phase 3, the last in a series of clinical trials to test their mRNA vaccine, to begin that trial actually in July. That trial will have 30,000 participants across several sites. It'll include all ages from under 18 to over 65. And actually Moderna has announced as well that they are going to do a manufacturing, they're going to start manufacturing as soon as the trial starts. So that means that if the trial is unsuccessful, they will have produced a vaccine that they'll have to destroy. But that also just shows the confidence they have in their vaccine. As important as the Moderna vaccine is, I should also mention that Pfizer, which of course is a big presence here in Connecticut, has no less than four mRNA vaccines in the works. Also very far along, 2 in clinical trials, not quite as far along as Moderna's, but also very important that they're in the works. And the last type of vaccine is one that uses some outside entity, in this case, an insect cell, to produce the proteins that will be recognized by your immune system to fight off the pathogen. Let me just move on to the next slide and tell you what's promising about the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines. They are so interesting and so fascinating because they trick the body into making some of the viral proteins itself. This comes out of a lot of research and a lot of existing drugs that work very well in cancer treatment, where the mRNA is used to attach to a cancer cell and get the body to recognize, to see a cancer cell as foreign and therefore to be combated by the patient's immune system. mRNA vaccines also interestingly work on both the innate and the acquired immune system. So it creates a very strong immune response. The innate immune system is the immune system we're born with, and the acquired immune system is the immune system that we develop over time as we're exposed to different pathogens. So having a vaccine, and traditional vaccines work pretty much only on the acquired immune system. So an mRNA vaccine that works on both the innate and the acquired systems, again, produces a very, very strong immune response. And also because, to some extent, mRNA vaccines are like inserting computer code into your cells. They sort of turn your cells into the manufacturing entity that makes the protein spikes that will be recognized for an immune response. It ends up being a simpler and faster manufacturing process. Now, I should say mRNA vaccines are considered very effective in the laboratory, but there are no mRNA vaccines that have been approved by the FDA. An mRNA vaccine was close to final approval for Ebola, but then a more traditional vaccine was developed and approved and put into use. Often when a disease peters out, as it did in Ebola, and another vaccine is found, payers lose interest in vaccine research and the research stops. But in this case with COVID-19, it looks like we're really going to find out a lot about mRNA vaccines and likely introduce them into the into hospital settings and into the medical treatment network. Now the other protein that the other vaccine that's of interest, especially here in Connecticut, is the Sanofi GSK vaccine, the one that uses essentially insects to grow the proteins that are used in the vaccine. This is the flu block technology that was developed right here in Protein Sciences. Protein Sciences is now a division of Sanofi. Sanofi bought Protein Sciences. And this technology allows a very precise and relatively quick production of vaccine. It also, bringing the two companies together, Sanofi and Protein Sciences, and with GSK, is very important because GSK has a lot of expertise in adjuvants, which are substances that are added to provoke a stronger immune response. So this is one of the oldest adjuvants is aluminum, but now there's some very very sophisticated adjuvants, and that means that you can actually use much less vaccine, the critical vaccine material, if you've got something that boosts or in some sense turbocharges the vaccine material, meaning that you need less of it. And so remember, we're going to have to produce billions of copies of vaccines in order to inoculate the world. And so supply is going to be critical, and something that means ends up meaning that you need less of the vaccine is going to be very important. Both companies, Sanofi and GSK, also have vast manufacturing capacity, which is going to be very, very important, as I said, to actually inoculate as many people as we need to. Now, there are some mRNA issues going back to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, the mRNA vaccines, which are sort of the cutting edge vaccines. Are the selected proteins the ones that are selected to get your cells to produce? Are they the right ones? Will they be recognized by your system, by your immune system? And will they be recognized as something to prevent COVID-19? Will it actually prevent COVID-19? How long will immunity last is another issue. There's been a lot about that in the press. I think that it's very unlikely that these vaccines will not produce some immunity. There would be no point in doing vaccines or for vaccine science if they didn't produce immunity. Although it is possible that immunity for the 2019 COVID-19 disease will be different from something that appears, so something that mutates or changes in 2021. Also, scientists have raised issues on other mRNA vaccines as to inflammatory side effects. And also, occasionally, there's been concern that in some diseases, the mRNA mechanisms can actually aggravate the disease. Now, as we begin to talk about treatments for COVID-19, I want to talk about, again, the original motivation, the premise of the quarantine. It was about flattening the curve. As you can see, without the quarantine, the progression of the disease would have overwhelmed our healthcare system, would have overwhelmed our hospitals. With the quarantine, we never got to the point of overtaxing our healthcare system or getting to the point of having to ration treatment. So flattening the curve isn't so much about decreasing the total number of cases as it is to slow down the rate of infection. Flattening the curve, I think, has become, and I think it's somewhat unfortunate, has become finding a cure. But you have to know that there are very few curative treatments for viruses. Now, why is that the case? It gets to the nature of viruses. They hijack the host's own biological machinery. They're very simple organisms. They're incredibly small with few of their own enzymes and proteins. There are very few targets for drug designers to target, to attach to the virus and try to disable it. I should say too that researchers often talk about seeing the pathogens they're trying to deal with, whether bacteriological or viral or fungal, is trying to see it in 3 dimensions. They're trying to see it almost like a planet you're trying to land on, and to try to find something you can attach to on that entity, on that planet, so to speak. And again, because of the small size of viruses and the very few very few things coming out of them to make them recognizable, it's a very hard process. Again, viruses are very small, 10 to 100 times smaller than the smallest bacteria. Now, since viruses invade, since they hijack and use our own cells to essentially live and replicate, most drugs that target viruses also damage the healthy cells that they invade, or the healthy cells surrounding the pathogens. The most widely used antiviral today is a medicine called Tamiflu. Probably many of you have heard about it. And it's only very marginally effective. One of the few, if only, cures for a viral infection is for hepatitis C. There are a couple of drugs. The most notable one, the first that was actually a cure, is Sovaldi, made by Gilead, also involved in the COVID-19 vaccine effort. At this point, I want to just say how important it is, to stress how important it is to bear in mind that finding a cure for viruses, and finding a cure in the case of hepatitis C, took decades and billions of dollars. I just want to step back and just talk about what I call the arc of drug discovery. It takes about 10 to 15 years and over 2.6 billion to bring a drug from idea to FDA approved product. And along the way, there's a ton of money to be spent, again, on the basic research, but also on things like the clinical trials we're talking about. Clinical trials like the one Moderna is doing, involving 30,000 people, and all the monitoring that has to be done and the blood work that has to be done. It's incredibly expensive. The biopharma industry is unlike really any other industry in the amount of time and money it takes to develop its products, and how great the failure rate is. This slide, I often actually use a cornucopia and as a backdrop. I call it the reverse cornucopia, meaning to show how many ideas and drug candidates there are out there for a new medicine that don't pan out. The ratio is something to 1,000 to 1. So for every 1,000 very promising candidates, only one ultimately shows up as a successful drug that's FDA approved. And so that $2.6 billion cost for developing a new drug includes so many of the drugs that don't pan out. Now, antiviral medicines for COVID-19. Many have been tried, but so far only another drug by Gilead, remdesivir, has shown some positive effect. You might have heard a lot about chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. There's been a lot of back and forth over the last couple of weeks about these two drugs, with our president potentially having taken them, some studies showing they did have efficacy, others showing they did not. And then just yesterday, I believe The Lancet, which had published a story, an article sort of indicating that the drugs had actually a negative effect, had some heart complications, actually withdrew that article and reprimanded the authors about the inability to really examine the underlying data. But I think on balance, it's pretty clear that these drugs, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, really have very little, if any, effect, and potentially a negative effect. So onto remdesivir. Let's just talk about it a little bit. Again, it seems to have the most efficacy, but it's only marginally effective. It lessens COVID-19 symptoms. It shortens the length of COVID-19 from about 15 days to 11 days, which is significant, 31% decrease. It ends up, people given, groups that are given, they are very severely sick patients who are given remdesivir have an 8% death rate versus 11.6% for those not given remdesivir. So again, it has a very positive effect. It turns out that a 5-day treatment of the drug is as good or actually better than a 10-day treatment. Antiviral drugs, as I mentioned, almost always affect healthy cells, have significant side effects. And so after a 5-day treatment, it turned out that a lot of side effects were coming to the fore. That you can have the positive effects of remdesivir in 5 days and not needing a longer course of drug treatment is very important, because the drug itself is very expensive and it's in short supply. And having just a 5-day supply means the drug can go a lot farther. The last thing I want to mention is just the price. There's been a lot of talk about the price of remdesivir. Articles about the manufacturing cost, which is about $9, and the actual price of the drug to hospitals, which is in the thousands of dollars, sometimes as high as $5,000 a course of treatment. And I just want to take some time to talk about why that is the case. And again, going back to that slide I showed on the arc of drug discovery, it takes so long and it takes so much money to research and develop a drug, that the manufacturing price is really not anywhere near as important as the cost of all that R&D. Manufacturing, to some degree, is the cost of making the cake. But the high cost, the very high cost, is the R&D. The R&D is figuring out the recipe, which takes, again, a long time, many years and a lot of money. Now, is treating COVID-19 just or mostly a respiratory disease? This affects the type of drugs that can be used to combat it. With more experience, and we're learning so much each day about how to treat COVID-19, it turns out COVID-19 may be a vascular disease as well. In the last few weeks, for example, we've learned that certain people have a genetic predisposition to be vulnerable to vascular inflammatory responses as a result of COVID-19. Roche, the drug company Roche, received emergency FDA approval just 2 days ago for a test for this genetic marker. This genetic difference could explain why some patients have massive heart and blood problems with COVID-19, while others do not. With the Roche test, doctors can now test for this genetic marker and put people who have it very quickly on the drugs to combat these blood and heart issues, inflammatory issues. So moving on to just to talk about the inflammatory response, inflammatory problems with heart patients. I'm sorry, all the inflammatory problems with COVID-19 treatment. It's difficult oxygenating inflamed blood vessels. It can cause plaque rupture. And again, it explains why people with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and heart disease have a much higher risk of COVID-19 severe complications. And it turns out that people who are intubated, patients treated with blood thinners, were 71% more likely to survive and recover versus 30% of people with not treated, intubated patients not treated with inflammatory drugs. Well, the last thing I want to talk about in terms of treatments is plasma treatment, which is using antibodies harvested from people who've recovered from COVID-19. This is a technology that's been in place for a long time, since the 1800s. It was first used to treat meningitis in the late 1800s. It's used today to treat immune deficient people against measles and mumps. It works. But it's very difficult. It's not difficult, but it's complicated and costly to harvest the antibodies from recovered patients. And there are also risks associated with it. It subjects people who are given the plasma, it subjects them to whatever else might be in that plasma, other pathogens that might be in that plasma. But definitely there's a lot of research projects to improve this process, speed the process, and also perhaps to make some synthetic antibodies to be able to use, just as you would a harvested antibody from somebody who had recovered. I want to talk just too about immunosuppressant drugs, like those to treat rheumatoid arthritis, because in addition to some of the cardiovascular issues that have come up, it also turns out that many patients end up having an overblown immune response. And so hospitals and doctors are learning to use selectively immunosuppressant drugs to actually tamp down the immune system, on the theory and the finding really that for some patients, the disease is not so bad as the body's own overreaction to it, its own immune system overreaction. And so now moving on, this slide, I just wanted to talk about fighting COVID-19 and actually reopening the economy depends on testing very much, knowing who has COVID-19. The goal is to identify COVID-19 infections, COVID-19 infected people through widespread testing to block infection. If infected people transmit the disease on average to fewer than one person, the disease progression is disrupted. It eventually stops. Now, how do you do this? How do you track and trace? How do you do contact tracing? Once you have a new infection identified, infected people are asked, how long have you had the symptoms? Where might you have been infected? Have you been to your workplace? Whom might you have been in touch with, and in what manner? Contacts are then questioned and quarantined. The ideal means to track and trace is a mobile or smartphone app. This sends out a beacon, it's received, and it makes possible to identify all those a person's been in contact with since the app has been activated. And this allows early disease identification and to catch it before the disease progresses. Now remember, people shedding virus, especially young people, often don't know they have it. People often shed the virus before they're symptomatic. And though many people have severe symptoms, many have no symptoms. So again, it's very important to identify people who you've been in contact with who may be shedding the virus, but don't know it, so that those people can be separated and quarantined. And of course, we'll be hearing a lot about the privacy concerns and how those can be overcome. Now, I just want to end with, to go over many of the quarantine side effects. Poverty and stress, obviously, they skyrocket. Poverty and stress skyrocket when unemployment rates reach levels not seen since the Great Depression. mental illness, suicide. There's spikes in opioid use. Perhaps, most important, most worrisome are the untreated heart attacks, strokes, and cancer. Stroke evaluations are down 40%. Cancer screening is down 60%. There hasn't been a miraculous decrease in the number of strokes or cancers. It's just that people aren't going in, and that looms large in the healthcare system as we go forward. There are actually, very sadly, 85% fewer living donor transplants. So people donating kidneys, parts of their liver, tissue, which are very effective transplants. That's been down 85%. Childhood vaccinations are down, ironically, and also sadly 50%. They're at 50% of the normal rate, and this will cause issues later with measles, mumps, and other childhood diseases. You probably read about there are many COVID-19 side effects as to the anesthesia, all the pills and drugs used to treat people that suffer from COVID-19. There's a shortage of remdesivir, a shortage of antidepressants. And the last thing I'll mention is because everyone's wearing masks, there's been a side effect of no one looking for lip makeup. Okay, last thing is public health conundrum. Is the coronavirus quarantine costing more lives than it saves? The public health metric is potential lives lost. Years of lives lost equal life expectancy minus the age of death. So by example, if life expectancy is 75, a 65-year-old person has a years of life expectancy of 10. 72-year-old would have years of potential life expectancy of 3. 50-year-old, 25. A newborn's is 75. Using this metric, the death of a single baby is just as bad as the death of 3 50-year-olds, 5 60-year-olds, 15 70-year-olds, or 75 74-year-olds. These are just, again, public policy metrics that are used, some very stark but important ones to think through as we deal with an eventual or with a potential spike in COVID-19 disease later this summer or in the fall. It gets to issues about reopening schools. The number of countries that have reopened schools is growing. It seems to have been marked without any great fanfare in Europe and Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand. Children don't appear to have to be significant spreaders of the novel coronavirus. They have fewer of the receptors the virus uses to enter the body, and it's the ACE2 receptor in the upper respiratory tract of children that is actually much less developed than in adults. It only starts to increase at the age of 10, and it's this ACE2 receptor that is what the coronavirus that we're dealing with today seems to attack. So it ends up that children account for less than 1% of total infections, and again, this informs decisions, public policy decisions that will be made as we go into the fall about reopening schools, and again, all those kind of public policy metrics about reopening the economy. So with that, I think I've run out of time. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes and we have 2 questions. So maybe we could do a minute per question. The first is, which vaccine method is safer for the body?
Certainly, traditional vaccines are the safest in the sense of we know and have the most experience with them. But all the others potentially could be as safe or safer. And some scientists believe the mRNA vaccines could potentially be the safest long term. As I said, we're learning so much about vaccine science in this process.
Great. And the last question is, why is hydroxychloroquine still being used to treat COVID if not effective? My mother was treated with this drug at Yale recently.
Well, as I mentioned, there's been so much back and forth, different studies showing, some showing efficacy, some showing actual, being counterproductive to the treatment of COVID-19. And so, and as I said, I think just yesterday, the Lancet, which had published a story, an article proving that those two drugs were not effective and actually counterproductive, withdrew that story because some underlying issues with the data and being able to examine the data. But I think on balance, the scientific community sees those drugs as having no effect or potentially having a negative effect. There are still pockets of the scientific community that think they have some effect. So I guess it's possible that some treating physicians could think, it's worth a try in some severely ill patients.
Great. Thank you. Those are all of our questions for you, Paul. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like to now introduce our final speaker, Representative Matt Ritter, a lifelong Hartford resident, was first elected in 2010 to the Connecticut General Assembly, where he represents the 1st Assembly District in Hartford. This is Matt's second term serving as House Majority Leader. Prior to becoming the House Majority Leader, Matt served for 2 years as the co-chair of the Public Health Committee, where he worked to pass legislation to help prevent deaths from overdoses, increase hospital fee transparency, and require that more mental health services be covered by private insurance markets. Prior to being elected to the General Assembly, Matt served on the Hartford City Council for 3 years, where he chaired the Planning and Economic Development and Legislative Affairs Committees. Matt graduated from Colby College in 2004 with a major in government and received his law degree from the University of Connecticut School of Law, graduating with honors in 2007. He is a practicing attorney in Hartford and resides in Hartford with his wife and their 2 children. Representative Ritter, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. All right, all set? Okay.
You are good to go.
If a 7-year-old or a 4-year-old or a massive golden doodle come in my background, please excuse me. I will try to escort one of the 3 of my children out of here, but they do like to Zoom bomb occasionally. But I know there's questions. I won't take a lot of time. Let me say this. Government in this age has been very different. We do a lot of Zoom calls, about 2 a week with the governor's top staff and the 6 top legislative leaders, 7 now because we have some retirements coming. So people are kind of filling in here and there, and staff. And we spend 2 hours covering a myriad of issues, some which we can resolve, some which we cannot. The good news is, as you heard, and that was very interesting to hear what the doctor was talking about earlier, Connecticut has seen a great trend. We're very encouraged by that. We think as we get into July, we're going to see a very, very steep drop off in cases. And the big question is what happens in the fall. And we're spending a lot of time on that. School is a big thing. If you don't have school, you don't have an economy. I was talking with Senator Murphy about that last night. We're putting a lot of thought into how to open schools safely, but I think we know they have to open. If we're going to err on one side of maybe being a little more aggressive, I think the agreement would be schools and universities. The next question for us is going to be the governor's emergency powers, the declaration that was given to him by the committee charged by statute to authorize it or sort of could veto it, expires in September. That'll be a very interesting debate. That committee is comprised of the 6 legislative leaders from the 2 chambers and the chairs and ranking members of the public health committees. And that authorization, again, will expire after Labor Day. So there's a lot going on. I know we'll get to some of the questions about special session, about the budget, all those things, so that will come up there. But what I can tell you is that for me, the biggest concern that I think we all have is sort of this uncertainty as to what happens with the second wave and what has this all meant in terms of Connecticut's future. One thing that I would tell you all is the real estate market in Fairfield County, even as far as Naugatuck in southeastern Connecticut and around Danbury, is absolutely humming. And the question for Connecticut is this the new normal? Are folks going to say, I'm willing to work in New York 1 or 2 days a week and that's it? Are folks thinking about a suburban recommitment of buildings that are 2 and 3 floors? What does it mean for Hartford that I represent downtown? So when we do get through this, which we will, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I think there's a general consensus that our state, with the right decisions, and we'll talk about our budget, This is a real opportunity for us, sort of a moment in time that we thought had left America may come back. I think people are looking for space. They're looking for good neighborhoods and good communities. And I think we really do offer that. It's a strength of Connecticut. And we have weaknesses, I acknowledge that. But anyway, so Alicia, I know there were a bunch of questions. I will probably answer a lot of the stuff people would rather talk about than me just sort of spitting things off. So why don't we get to those?
Sure. Would you like me to read you them one at a time?
Do you mind? That'd be great.
No, I can absolutely do that. The first question is, what do you think are the chances the legislature will have a special session this summer?
We will. How's that sound? A little complicated how you get into special session in Connecticut. The governor can call us in, or we can do a petition by a majority of the House and Senate. I think we're going to opt for the former and have the governor call us in. Look, there's a million things we could do. I think we are right now focused on two critical things for the summer special session. One is changing the absentee ballot voting laws for November to allow anybody to vote by absentee ballot. This is not mail-in voting, by the way, which would violate our state constitution, but absentee balloting by defining sickness as COVID-19. Our constitutional provision on absentee ballot voting is very restrictive in Connecticut. But one reason you can vote is for sickness and illness. And the question is, well, is COVID-19 really a sickness? When you think about it, does it mean just if you have it at that moment, or is it enough the threat of getting it or the threat of transmission is so high without it, and then with no vaccine available? We think that's the case. It may very well end up in litigation, but I think you'll see a bipartisan movement to allow people to vote by absentee ballot that way. The second issue is police accountability. I was on the phone today with Senator Winfield from New Haven, who co-chairs the Judiciary Committee. I'm very confident we'll have a bill that is good. Now, I remind folks in Connecticut, we did a very good bill just last year on police accountability. One of the main things that we changed was investigations, where if there's a police shooting or a police incident, it gets referred to a different state attorney from a different jurisdiction, a different county. And that was a big change. And we did some other things as well in that. But we're looking at doing another bill, hopefully the special session. So those would be the two items, Alicia.
Great. Is there a specific time frame you think that special session will happen?
I think it'll be around the 4th of July, give or take 5 or 10 days. You have to do the absentee ballot thing in a timely fashion to order all the paper, the ballots you may need to give municipalities time to prepare. So we can't do it in August or September. It has to be in July.
Great. How has this changed the way you are serving your constituents?
I will tell you that DOL has been my number one complaint, getting people unemployment. I'm lucky as a leader. I have a pretty, decent sized staff, so I have one person who every morning spends 3 hours going through the unemployment compensation issues we've seen. It's been that frustrating for my constituents. I represent an interesting district too. I represent the governor and the Secretary of State, and about a half mile down the road, one of the poorest zip codes in all of New England. So I have people who have called about needing food, and I have people who, have privilege of sort of looking at it from a different perspective. So it's a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls, very different. But the biggest thing you can't do is go to events. Now with the rallies, I've sort of been out at night and doing some of those things. I was actually in Bloomfield and obviously around the Capitol, but normally I'm going to neighborhood revitalization meetings or things like that. That has all stopped, obviously.
You did speak a little bit about the absentee ballot, but there's a specific question that says, what impact will this have in this important election year? Can you talk a little bit about the absentee voting issues and the decisions that will need to be made?
Yeah, we have to make that decision as a legislature to change the statute and how we define illness and sickness so that people can vote. I don't know how many people will choose to vote by absentee ballot. I will tell you that it is cumbersome. If anyone has voted by absentee ballot, it's not mail-in voting. You have to first fill out the application, mail it back, then they mail you the ballot. Then there's the inner envelope, the outer envelope. I can't tell you how many absentee ballots. I would say about 20% of all absentee ballots get rejected for not signing the inner envelope, which is required by state statute. I do worry about that. And so I don't know how many people will avail themselves of it. A lot of it may depend on where we are in September and October. If the virus is under control like the way I think we're headed in the next 3 weeks, people might be willing to go to the polls. If it's not, you'll have to see widespread voting, which may delay results, by the way. I think Joe Biden will win Connecticut pretty easily, but we may not know legislative races for a couple of days And we will probably have 20 races within a couple hundred votes of each other. So that could delay the results there. But none of us know how to campaign in this scenario, and none of us know what more people voting by absentee ballot will mean. Does it mean a higher percentage of people vote in Connecticut, or are you just taking the same population that always votes in presidential elections and changing the method by which they vote? I tend to think it'll be the latter. I don't think you'll see a huge spike in participation. If you're not voting in the Trump-Biden presidential election, I don't think it's going to matter whether you get mailed a ballot or not. So I think you won't see higher turnout driven by absentee ballots. It'll be the interest in the presidential election.
And going back to the special session, we had just a lot of questions. I know you mentioned a few things that you think should be addressed, but do you have any other, I guess, ideas or things that you think have to be addressed during that special session?
So look, the governor's executive orders run through September and arguably a little longer, depending on how you interpret the statute. There will probably be things in September that we have to address prior to or around when his executive orders could expire. So we're putting a list of that together. Now, this is a group of CPAs, so I'm sure someone is texting you right now and saying, what about the budget? So let me talk about that. Sometimes when these things happen and you see plummeting revenue numbers, people get frantic. I compare it to the Arkansas Razorbacks of the early 1990s, and the way they used to play college basketball with Nolan Williamson as the coach, or Nolan Richardson as the coach. Is just havoc, and people want to do this, they want to do that. My job as a leader is to calm everybody down. We put ourselves in a very good position with the bond covenants from 2017 to rebuild our rainy day fund, to replenish it to the highest in the history of the state. That will get us through fiscal year 2020. The numbers for 2021 don't look great. I acknowledge that. The problem is to go and make cuts or raise revenue with no idea what's going to happen is not a responsible course, and here's why. I have spent every waking minute I have with a congressional member in our state, and even last night with Senator Murphy, talking about the next bill from Congress and whether states will get reimbursement. Not one person has told me no. The question is how much. The worst case scenario that I've heard for Connecticut is $5 billion over 2 years. And maybe $10 billion over 2 years. Could be $5 billion a year. If that were to happen, our entire rainy day fund would be replenished to $3 billion, and we'd still have enough money to patch over any revenue shortfalls that we see. We also don't know where we are with the income tax because we delayed payments till July, which essentially is going to be in the FY21 year. So I'm just urging caution, as is the governor. So people who say, you got to go do this to the budget, you can't, because you need to wait and see what happens with Congress. That's a very big component. And you know, I trust Congressman Larson. I trust Senator Murphy implicitly when they tell me they feel very confident we'll be okay. So what's interesting is I talked at the opening about people buying back into Connecticut from the real estate market, companies looking maybe to relocate here, consolidate space. I'm talking about Congress maybe authorizing this funding. We may end up coming out of this okay, depending on how long the virus lasts and how long it takes to get a vaccine. But we don't want to panic, but I can assure everybody in the state that we are monitoring the budget very, very carefully. And if we don't get money from Congress, if they give us nothing, then I acknowledge we have a Herculean task, just like every state in this country, to address our deficit. It would be in the billions, yeah.
Okay. What do you think will be the biggest positive to come out of this life-changing time?
I'm still waiting for some of the positives, maybe. I will say, I mean, on science, right? Some of you may know that I led the charge to eliminate the religious exemption for vaccinations. The anti-vaccination movement has grown in Connecticut. As a matter of fact, when New York changed the law to get rid of the religious exemption in their state, Connecticut's skyrocketed. You know why? People moved from New York to Connecticut to take advantage of our lax vaccination laws. I think people, when I try to put this bill to the legislature, I can't tell you how many legislators told me this is an affront. Vaccines are dangerous. Scientists are lying. Doctors are crazy. They want to make money. I was accused of personally benefiting from vaccinations because my wife is a primary care physician, that somehow I was lining my pockets because she doesn't give vaccinations. She's a primary care physician. Anyway, it was all laughable to me. So maybe we'll believe in science a little more. Maybe we'll believe in the healthcare industry and realize that vaccines are safe, effective, and necessary, or things like this will happen. And by the way, imagine if the disease struck children. I heard the slide talking about how children are not impacted by this. Flip the virus around to measles or something like that, where it kills babies and young people as opposed to older people. Same tragedy. Boy, what a different reaction, though. I have to be honest. It would be more heart and gut wrenching. And I have older parents, and I can say that. The second thing that may come out of this, though, is also thinking about quality of life. There's often this debate about in America about how we work and how we operate. And I think technology is going to help bridge that divide in the sense that it may not be the worst thing in the world to work from home on Fridays if you can. In my job as a lawyer, I can do that. I've always been able to log in on a Friday. But I'll admit, as a younger lawyer, if I wasn't in 5 days a week, sort of like, where were you? Unless they knew I was at the Capitol, perhaps. That's going to change. I think that's better for families. I think that we can use this example to remind ourselves that the backbreaking nature of the American economy sometimes, there are ways to still make money, but also do it safely and really invest in people and their time and their families. And this might be a good way to think about that.
On the flip side of that, what's your biggest concern for Connecticut and its residents at this time?
The budget, right? If Congress doesn't treat this like a national emergency, a national problem, and we're coming in FY21 staring at $3 billion, and then FY2 $3 billion, you'll have exhausted the rainy day fund. You could raise taxes, you could cut, you'd still be short. You're probably borrowing money at that point to pay operating expenses, which is never a good idea. Although interest rates will be probably at historic lows. But that keeps me up at night. I was there when Governor Malloy came in and inherited the $3 billion fiasco. He was able to do it, but that was a tough budget. And then I was there in 2017. It was my first year as majority leader when we went till Halloween and we did the bipartisan budget. And that deficit was only about 1.7 or so, 1.7 billion. So if you double that, it'd be very, very hard. I almost think it'd be impossible to get a budget if it's that high. So that keeps me up at night. But Senator Murphy's my guy, so I'm counting on him to take care of us.
Great. Switching gears a little bit to schools. How closely have you been working with public school administrators?
Very closely, but we're stepping it up a notch. I was talking with the governor about this yesterday. We have about a month to make some really strong decisions. And as I said at the opening, if we're going to err on sort of pushing back on I just said we have to value scientists, and here I'm saying push back. But if you're going to be a little more, let's lean on opening, I would do it for schools, right? Here's the problem. Right now, we're saying you can have 10 a class, right? So 10 kids per class. And we have maybe 35% of the teachers don't want to come back because they either have pre-existing conditions or they're over 65. So supply and demand. You want fewer students per class and you have fewer teachers. That's a problem. So we got to figure that out. The other problem is there may be capital costs that have to be incurred by municipalities and boards of education to prepare for this. It might be setting up new classrooms or new technology. Well, boards of education can't borrow money. Only the towns can. So if they're fighting with the town side, how are they going to pay for it? They have their appropriation. Some of the municipal budget fights, as we know, are often difficult. Boards of ed, unless they're regional school districts, are very limited. They have no ability to raise revenue. They're challenged by that. They may need state support for that. So we're spending a lot of time, and I think you'll see the governor, based upon my conversations with him, we're going to really hone in on that, legislative leaders as well. If there's one big thing we have to figure out, it's the opening of schools. Yeah.
And this just goes into this a little more. We're hearing a lot of things about half days, alternative days, blended learning, needing to drive instead of putting your kids on the bus, kids wearing masks, not being able to play with toys. The list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. Is there thought being put to the fact that kids still need to be able to learn and enjoy school?
Yes, and that's my concern. The summer school regulations will not work for regular school. I've reviewed those, and that may work for a small setting and will not work. And by the way, if kids really cannot transmit the virus, and I think we'll have enough medical evidence to that in the next 6 weeks, then it further alleviates the concerns that are out there. And even if you go 10 a class, okay, I love my children. I don't know that hygiene is the best thing for them. It's a challenge when they leave the bathroom to get them to wash their hands, let alone thoroughly wash their hands. If you have kids in school and you can transmit the virus, which we're not sure you can, you will probably have infections. I mean, I acknowledge that. It's not the cleanest of places. But I worry about in my city where 20% of the kids have not even logged on at all. I worry about my kids, because I'm not a great teacher, as my wife works full-time as well. They need normalcy. They really do. They need youth sports. They need those things back. They need to be able to go to music class. So again, if we're going to err on the side of caution, it should be, or on not as caution, have less caution would be there. And I agree with that point. I think we need 10 is too small in the class. It should be closer to 15 to 20. Staggering days doesn't work if your kids, I mean, if Jack and Emma go to school the same day, that's great. If Jack goes on Monday and Emma goes Tuesday, for me, that's not going to work for me and my wife. Trust me, I'm with you. And I have some people tell me that I'm crazy because I'm being reckless with people's lives. And I don't agree. I don't think the science is there to support that. But let me say this. If you are a teacher who does not feel comfortable going back to teach, you should not be forced to. We should hire superintendents. We should buy classes. We should do a lot of things. But I agree with that. If you feel unsafe, you should get paid and you should work from home. And you should be on the remote learning side, right? There's still going to be a need for that. And number two, we need to have a plan in place for if a teacher gets COVID-19. That is the one thing that we really have to think through. Do you shut the whole school down for 2 weeks? How do you deal with that? But trust me, we're thinking about it a lot. Yeah.
And the last one on this topic is, I know you said that the next month is going to be crucial with this. Is there a time frame on when parents and teachers will know what to expect come fall?
Yeah, I think you got to know by about early July, mid-July, what the final regulations are going to be. Because remember, school opens in late August in some places. So if they have to know. Bus companies have to know. Absolutely. It will come out soon. But I can tell you, of the legislative leaders, I'm trying to think now, if I'm the only one with school-age children left, and that might be true. Some have grandkids, but I think I'm a good voice in there. Senator Duff's got one in high school. I don't know if he has a younger one, but I'm the only one certainly in the elementary school realm, and I'm all over it. Trust me.
That's great.
I've lived it.
Those were the last of the pre-submitted questions. I don't know if you have any other final remarks that you want to address.
No, and if there's a couple questions that came in, I'm glad to answer them. No problem. If not, great.
One of the questions is just, isn't the danger of school is that kids bring the virus home to older family members?
Yeah, well, we don't know that kids transmit it. That's a big unknown right now. And you saw the slides we need more information on that. So those studies that are coming out from Europe in particular are very helpful to guide us. Yes, and so there may be some children for whom, if that is the problem, or if they have, let's say, compromised immune systems, or live with a grandparent, for example, we may have to provide different opportunities for them. I'll give you an example. You could increase distance learning, but unlike now where the third grade teacher logs in and has 22 kids, maybe you could have more one-on-one instruction time. You could make sure a school community officer goes to the house to set up the laptop to make sure it works, right? I think that's a smaller population of maybe 10 to 15% where we'd have to think about that. But if we could spend all of our time focusing on getting those kids a better education than we are now, keeping them safe and healthy, for the other 85%, they could have some sense of normalcy. I think that's what it is. The other thing that may happen is we don't know what the virus is going to be come August, but we may also have to pull back, right? We may go with a more aggressive school reopening and have to pull back days. The schools like UConn are going to do Thanksgiving to basically mid-January, they're going to be shut down, maybe even February 1st. We may need a model in Connecticut, depending on what happens. We've thought about this, that after Thanksgiving until January 1, kids don't go back to school for 6 weeks around the holiday time, right? Those things may happen, but we want the data to drive the decision, but we're not ignoring public health. I think you go as strong as you can to reopen schools, But you tell parents we may have to pull back depending on what happens. But we'll look, guys, by July 20th, you'll be able to go to a bar and sit at a bar stool again. You'll have crowds of a couple hundred. You will have had normalcy in some way for almost 2 months. We'll know. And then other states open 6 weeks before us. We'll have a much better sense of what's going on by late July, early August.
Okay, and the last question, going back to the budget and how it's scary right now with COVID-19 affecting businesses so much, and attracting new businesses and keeping the ones that we have here is so important. What can Connecticut do to make things more tax friendly and to attract more businesses in? And is that something that will be focused on as well this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we looked, for example, we stopped taxing. I mean, I can talk about residents for a second, right? We stopped taxing Social Security. We stopped taxing the pensions for retirees in Connecticut. We've tried to look at some of those things. I've looked at the estate tax, quite frankly, driving my liberal friends crazy. On the business side, we would love to phase out some of the taxes that we've agreed to phase out. It all comes down to where you are as a state. If you're looking at a $3.8 billion hole, there are no sacred cows. The single greatest thing we can do as a state is keep that rainy day fund high, be disciplined with it, and keep it where it is now so we can borrow at lower rates, send a signal to businesses and rating agencies that if there is a downturn, we can absorb it without going back to them. The problem of 2011 through 18 was not having that available. There were no options. When Dan Malloy took over, criticize him all you want, he inherited a $3 billion deficit, a state government that was borrowing for operating expenses, $750 million a year to pay salaries, okay? And no rainy day fund. When I say no, I don't mean a couple $100 million, zero. That is a recipe for disaster. Why? There's no predictability. You're shooting here to solve this thing and then it's leaking over there. You're taxing businesses too much. You're cutting spending too much that may increase expenses on the back end for hospitals, for example. So the key is try to be stable. Try not to have these huge swings. And the only way I know to do that in government is to have a very strong rainy day fund. It gives you so much options, liquidity, good cash flow, low borrowing rates. That's the key. So if Congress gives us this money, it's not, in my humble opinion, to go out there and wildly spend excess money. You may have some increased spending. You may be able to decrease some taxes on businesses. You may be able to tweak certain parts of the tax code to bring folks from New York and Boston, for example. You may be able to give tax benefits to folks that bring more employees in. But if you don't have a rainy day fund established and sound, you can't do those things.
Great. That is all the questions that we
Great.
have. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, everyone. Be well.
Yes, absolutely. I'm
Thanks.
just going to wrap things up, everyone. Just a couple quick things. We just wanted to let you all know we're really appreciative of your time this morning. We're happy that you came and jumped on this webinar. We do have a variety of live stream webinars and on-demand products. You can go right to ctcpas.org, click on the professional development tab, and then you'll see all the options there. Also, every Friday, we send out what I like to call our online learning offering email that has already hit your inboxes today. So if you are looking to sign up for some different things or see what CTCPA has to offer, that is in your email right now. So thank you so much for being with us this morning. We hope that you found it valuable, and we will talk to you all hopefully soon when we can meet back in person. So have a great day.